everybody. Yes, as add to Marie's welcome to our participants in our courses and our distinguished guests, our corporate partners who are here, without whom the program just doesn't really run. So, and I'm really delighted to have two super guests here on this theme of creativity and startups. And I'm going to do just the briefest of introductions because I'm going to get them to introduce themselves and their kind of career so far to you as well. Holli Rogers, recently departed design director at Net-a-Porter, one of the founding team of that fantastically successful startup. So they're a wonderful track record. And Emeline Wraith, the chief, who styles herself chief herder at Remote Goat. So you're going to have to stay to the end just to discover what that exactly means. And is also heavily into the dance music scene. So we've got kind of two very different looks in a very similar area, the idea of creativity in fashion, in dance, in startups, and behind that, the idea that any of these businesses have to, introduce a new idea. That's what leads to take up in the marketplace. And creativity is the birth of that idea, but what do you do with it after that? That's really the trick between success and failure. So again, thank you for coming. And Holli, can I maybe start with you then to tell us a little bit about how you got to be where you are today and the steps that got there and the role that creativity maybe had to play in that as you touched the creative world.
I don't know.
That's a big question.
It is a big question.
Do a little
That's
one.
all loaded.
Little answer to start with.
Thank you guys for coming this evening, by the way. I know it's a Friday night, so I know you probably have some other priorities. But I grew up in Texas in a very small town called El Paso, which I'm sure most of you have never heard of.
Border town, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And I have found actually through the years and I mean, this is by no means a statement on anybody, but a lot of the people that I've worked with in the fashion industry through the years, the ones that have really done incredibly well actually have a tendency to come from small towns, because I think you kind of really try to make it different, try to approach things from a different perspective, which I think is where creativity is born, basically. So I lived in Texas, went to university there, and then actually ended up working at a company called Neiman Marcus, which is a luxury offline, which I will say, not bricks and mortar, retailer in the US. And I started on the shop floor and basically just wanted to pay my bills. I had no particular agenda. I did study fashion in school though, because I've always loved it. So, and it's kind of, my life has been like an interesting array of decisions that are strung together by, thankfully, success. I have had a lot of really amazing people support me through the process too, which I can't deny enough is a lot of the reason why I sit here today. Some people who just recognized in me the either and maybe the potential, I guess, is probably more so.
So mentors are important as
well. Yeah,
very
important, very important.
To kind of either see what you have in you, the potential, or just to believe in you.
Yeah, both.
A bit of both.
Both, definitely. Yeah. In fact, I was thinking about it today. I was like, there's a handful of people that I really need to go back and thank. And a few of them at my university, actually. But, so without them, again, I wouldn't be here. But then from there, I went through the training program. And I think it was just kind of, not to belittle it at all, but it was kind of a means to an end. So, but it was something that I did actually have interest in. And then from there, got into this wonderful world of buying and all the amazingness that goes along with all the fashion shows and all the bits and pieces that keep us all excited. And back when I started, we had to get everything on VHS tape. So I just sort of dated myself there. And you guys are so incredibly lucky to be able to see it streamed live, like the Valentino Couture show yesterday at 5:30. Amazing. And I was sitting at home. But from there, I decided that I went through the program, loved fashion, but I wanted to live in New York. So basically, that was my calling, and ended up getting a job at Chanel. Basically, through it was, I know it sounds crazy actually when I say it. The buying office I worked at Neiman's, we actually bought Chanel, so I had some connections. I'm not gonna Worked there for 3 years, and actually amazing company, beautiful product, incredible marketing, but people never leave, and something that I've always had is ambition. So basically I was like, okay, no one's leaving, I gotta leave. I need to figure out what I'm gonna do next. And it's, to me, totally fascinating, because at that point I had just started to see fly postering all around Manhattan for a company called Boo.com, which I don't know how many of you guys have heard of or read about. And not too long after that, Net-a-Porter started. And I had a friend, interestingly enough, who moved over here from New York that I worked with at Chanel, and she actually started working for Net-a-Porter. And when I left and I ended up moving here for personal reasons, I was on a flight coming over, and this woman sitting next to me on the plane said, so, you know, chatty, Americans are very chatty. Sorry. And she's like, so what have you been doing? I said, oh, I've been working at Chanel. She's like, what? I said, like, past tense. She's like, you crazy? You just quit the most amazing company in the world? And I said, yeah, oh God, what have I done? I could have slogged away, staying in the same position the rest of my life. We're the greatest company in the world, amazing, no. And I was like, did I make a mistake? Did I make a mistake? And interestingly enough, that was like 14 years ago, I've had the same conversation about Net-a-Porter with people, because I quit about 6 months ago, and it was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made. But I've had the exact same reaction, and the beauty of that for me was that company didn't even exist at that point. And the potential that's out there for you guys and what comes along is phenomenal. You just don't know what the next greatest thing is. People, I mean, you guys probably look at Net-a-Porter like it's been around forever. It's kind of actually very firmly established now after a lot of work. But yeah, it's amazing.
So there's
to see
this
how it
restless character.
Yeah.
That's the girl from El Paso.
And it's taking
kind of wants to
risks,
keep
I
moving.
think. Yeah, it's that. It's taking risks and just kind of not having too high of expectations for what's next. Because I think if it's good, it's always good to have expectations, but I think it also can impede your next step if you're too focused on that particular thing. You lose sight of what else might come up. Because I could have gone, oh my God, I gotta go work at Selfridges or Harrods or whatever if I were to stay in the same line of work.
Yeah. I'm going to come to Emeline in a minute. I just want to ask you one kind of closer on that, which is this, you know, what your view is of the element of risk in everything you're doing. I mean, risk in fashion, for example. You know, are you looking, you know, if you're a buyer, if you're a fashion buyer, are you looking for the, you know, what's the difference between looking for the safe bet you know will sell and looking for the risky one? That, because presumably it's a mix of both. It's about having a confidence that you can push the market also in a direction, or that it's ready for it.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to strike that balance, depending on what the business goals are, obviously. But I was very lucky in that we established ourselves very early on as the place to go to get fashion that you couldn't otherwise get anywhere else, pretty much. And luckily, we found the customers that came along and aligned with us and our vision. And so it allowed me to go out and take a lot of risks, like buying Alexander McQueen's last collection right before he passed away. And there were like 12 runway looks, and they were about 25,000 pounds at retail. And we just said we have to represent it, because this is something that will resonate with a handful of probably collectors more than anything else. And an homage to him. And it definitely made.
So part of it, we might come back to this, is this idea that when you develop something new, when you do something creative, you nonetheless need to have an eye on what the market for it will be. The problem with something new is the market doesn't exist at that point. So it's like throwing a ball at a target that isn't yet there, but you're hoping it will be by the time the ball lands.
Yeah, but interestingly enough, certain factors will actually almost, in our case, the magazine industry had basically already set the stage. So maybe there's other forums in which they're setting the stage for a business to actually have a whole bunch of people that are just already waiting.
Yeah, that's actually, that would have been my point, is that often the market's already calling for something, and it's not necessarily that you know exactly what it's going to be yet, but the kind of the ripple or the whispers of things that people like, that things are going to come. That's trend and prediction and stuff like that, isn't it? Essentially.
And trends they kind of like rivers, like big rivers. They do actually start somewhere as a small tributary, but spotting it is the challenge.
Yeah.
Emeline, tell us a little bit about, are you a girl from a small border town, and impelled by that same desire to escape?
I'm driven by inquisitiveness and an endless imagination and a desire to, I don't know, creativity in me is a thing is endlessly generated, and I can't help it. And I know that it can be annoying and frustrating for the people around me, because I have an idea a minute, and it's which idea we're going to execute, which idea is executable. So I think a lot of my life people have tried to rein that in, and it was only until that I had my own company that I had the ability to be free. In terms, because we're talking about startups, I saw Peter Thiel speak in Dublin. I went to the Web Summit in Dublin, and when he spoke, I just realised the possibilities are endless, and I thought in my head, will never let anyone confine my creativity ever. So that was a really enlightening. I knew it already, but it was an enlightening moment. So I'm from Highgate actually, but my dad's in the oil and gas industry and took us around the world. We're very inquisitive little Emeline, went to live in Borneo, which is, in Brunei, which is in Borneo. So I kind of had the ability to look at a lot of things from a very young age that I shouldn't really have been, as a little white girl from down the road, should have been seeing. But we then ended up in Hertfordshire after living in very rural Norfolk, someone I'd always been really interested in computers, like early stage computers, and digital art before digital art actually existed, because again I'm going to show my age there as well. So I was doing things with computers, making stuff when everyone else was trying to program them. I wanted to use them to create pretty things. And someone suggested that I went to one of the local colleges and spoke to the director there, who was part of the typographic circle. So I went and studied fine type, which I thought was quite wonderful, and was very inspired by the Bauhaus, who I still believe are very relevant to this day. So that's who I turn to. If I'm having a day where I feel uninspired, I will look at something. I want to go and stay there. You can actually stay there. I don't know if you know that, but you can. So I went there and I worked nights and I made web buttons, and I got selected to be a design junior, and I worked really hard. And as you know, the years go by, I found myself at what I thought was going to be my dream job at a huge below-the-line marketing agency in London, who have done some amazing work, but it just killed my creativity, and I was so stifled, and I walked out of there just such a broken person. Because I couldn't do things in the same way that everyone else is doing things. I had to just be free to express my creativity in my own way. So I very naively, I walked out into a recession, by the way. I'd always had a job. Yeah, I don't know why I did that.
But you didn't cause that yourself.
No, I didn't, but I
can't
just...
be blamed by that.
No, but I just thought, I'll get another job. I've always had one. It was super easy, and I didn't realise. And I lived at the time in Hertfordshire, in a very beautiful village, and I sat on my bed and I was just like, I don't want to go back to the city. I'm really disillusioned. I want to work remotely. And I lived opposite a farm, and as I think this is genuine. A goat walks into the scene, and I'm like, I'm going to start a company. It's going to be called Remote Goat. It's going to be a marketplace for creative freelancers to find projects. And I started to look around. There was nothing like it. People per hour, that sort of thing. And they don't really do creativity justice. They sell us short, and it's a logo for 50 quid, and designers can't live on that. So I walked around with this idea, and I built on it. And then I was taken on by a company called Labara, who are a virtual mobile operator, who had grown like 100% during the recession to help on their rebrand. Let me caveat, and I know that this is being filmed, but they're still working on that now. So, and there's, it's still an evolution for them. But essentially, the founder of that company, who is an entrepreneur and had won some awards that year, and he was very entrepreneurial, decided to give back and look within their four walls for idea, and ran an in-house Dragon's Den competition. And I entered with this idea, and as I was just saying to Holly earlier, I'm a creative, and so I just entered because I thought, oh, I'll just do it. And then I did a presentation. I'm a creative, so that's what we do. We do really good presentations. And I won some investment. But I didn't have a clue, not one clue about business. I had no idea what a P&L was. Literally. So I spent a year being very frightened of the money that I had and being pushed from pillar to post and not really understanding. And I built it was like 5 years ago, so I built a piece of tech before a startup existed in London, so there was no Google campus, the accelerators didn't really exist, and I didn't really have peer-to-peer networks. It was quite a lonely existence. And that tech was built by a big company, and the user journey was really hard, so there's a high barrier to entry. And there was a real problem with trust online. And this is still trying to be tackled to this day. So when it's the early days of a company or inception, they don't want to put a logo online, they want you. So they wanted me, and so people would ring me up, they don't want to put the project online. Emily, do you know someone, or will you work with us? So I end up operating as an agency, are under the radar, and then campus comes along and the startup scene starts happening, and I really recognise the things that I'd gone through and the value that I can add. And before long, I know loads of mentors and investors, and I have this huge peer-to-peer network. And we have all these people that want to work with us. So essentially, we have become a brand acceleration agency who works with startups from very early days, inception, they just an idea, they might not even have a name, and then they go away and they validate the idea, and they come back when they've raised or they're making revenue, and we build an amazing product with them, and essentially we help connect them to their market, make them attractive to investors, and essentially launch a product. This is hopefully going to be the future products of tomorrow. That's the main thing. Yeah.
Some of them will, at least. Yeah.
I hope.
So there's a very interesting theme in what you've both been talking about, which is really the difference between, I suppose, what I'd call an idea and a brand. In other words, you can have an idea for a business, but then in order to land it in the marketplace, you need to package that somehow into a concept or a brand that people will recognize. And I think what we're saying is, normally the need is there, the wish, the demand for the service or the product, but there just isn't a brand that delivers it. So maybe talk a little bit about that. I mean, Holly, in your experience, that balance between the product being right and the brand being right. In fact, I mean, Net-a-Porter always very smart with their brand extensions and how they name them and so on. What's the balance, do you think, in that business between being a famous brand and being just a great product offering or service offering? Are they the same, or is one dominant?
I think it's at different stages. I mean, I was with the company for 12 years, so I saw it go through very relentless stages. Every year seemed to be very different. And so at the very early stage, it was, the design of the site and the design of the box and the design of how the customer care.
And that was to try and be distinctive as well as, I guess, deliver what you thought the market wanted.
Yeah, and we had, at that time, basically we had no competition either. Our biggest issue was broadband coverage and what people had in various countries. I can tell you Italy had none, basically, at that point, most countries actually. So dealing with those sorts of issues.
Yeah. And Emily, now you're working, I think, in a way at the other end of the scale of people who've got ideas. But from what you've said, and we've had early discussions, and you helped with our programs before, this idea of people who have ideas but are not quite sure how to brand it.
Completely. I mean, they're either answering an idea, they're answering a problem, they're solving a problem, which is great, or they're producing something that's going to be kind of like a want, so I want this, or I need it, and essentially, they might not quite understand what their brand is, but what they've really got to think about is what they want it to say to their consumer. And so, I mean, lots of research goes on around that, isn't it? But a lot of it's around tone of voice and messaging and that sort of thing.
And the newer the idea, presumably, the more difficult it is to get reliable research back on it, because it's unlike stuff that people have seen before.
The funniest thing is it's either really unreliable research or it's research that you're going to create for yourself. So it's like a double-edged sword, you see what I mean? So it's a cure and a curse. On one sense, you can stand there and say, well, we believe this because of this, and it's going to change everything. And people might be like, well, how do you know that? There's no validation. But actually, it's because there is going to be validation, but you just don't know it yet. See what I mean?
Yeah. So the feeling that there's well, that's the basis on which people dig for gold, isn't it? You know, I believe there is some under the ground there.
It's just, I think there is always a base for research, and then you kind of, that's where the idea starts, isn't it? So no matter what we do, we always start with research. So we have these various different things. So we have, and I know that I've spoken to you about it before, so we look at competitors. Obviously, it's really, really important to look at your competitors, but not be polarized by them, because you don't want to be constrained. But also look at complementary products. I mean, your product is going to sit on this virtual shelf with all these other complementary products that this person that you need to imagine is going to be using, and how are you going to add value to that? It's like going into a women's handbag. You have all this stuff, but every handbag is different. You've got to just know that your product is going to sit amongst all this other stuff well, you know. So and then also, again, thinking about trend and taste. You want it to be like on point, but you don't want it to be too trendy, because if it's too trendy, it's
fall off too quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So, but is it classic? But you don't want to introduce tech either for tech's sake. And a lot of people, as a lot of that been happening, and it's finally we're starting to like get over that phase. You know, just like throwing in things all for the sake of it, because it's cool. Actually, do you know what happens? That just makes it awkward to get to the point. So,
and it's also presumably it's a diversion from the actual major benefit of the product. If you get caught up with how you know, because there's lots of technology in, say, the Net-a-Porter solution, but that's the last thing that you want anyone to think about.
It's actually quite basic, and we've had many people through the years like come in to pitch all sorts of ideas for like ways you can scan your body in and try the garments on and all that. And you know, it's like, yeah, it sounds really interesting, but after like one or two goes, you're gonna be like, oh God, bored. I just want to move on. I just want to click through products. So we've been, the great thing about, we had an entire room of a user group. So we had everybody able to give us their feedback on the site in the room. So we try to keep it as simple as possible, because everybody has enough going on as it is. But I mean, I think that the interesting thing too also about what I have seen in the last 10 years is that we were and still are market leaders, but we had about 4 years ago a surge of competition, and they all came in and copied exactly what we did. I mean, the navigation, all these things that we just took for granted, that we just decided, and we're going to put product up on these certain days for no other reason other than that's when we decided. You know, like everything we did, that was intuitive gut. There was some research, but very little research you could rely on. So we went from doing that, establishing what is now kind of a fashion industry, which is so weird to think about. But, and now like having to differentiate ourselves. So what would we do to differentiate? So it becomes the layering of a new editorial director. So it takes the editorial piece of the magazine to a whole nother level. We started a print magazine. We started, you know, you launch a few things that are differentiators to your competitors, but it's all obviously you've got
But presumably as a business becomes more mature, what happens is that your target audience changes, because you were maybe early adopters at the beginning, and then after some time you've got actually a different profile, and everyone's copying you anyway, so as you say, you've become the sort of standard. So does the brand then, you know, does what you often need to change, or do you know, is part of the problem you've got to find out where the early adopters are going to go to next, and is that where, say, a company like Net-a-Porter should then develop itself?
Well, yeah, I mean, you want to make sure that you're always going to try and talk to that. So for me, like in a balance of an offer, because I oversaw everything that we bought, I was always making sure that we had the latest, greatest pieces, but then I was also making sure we had those same shoes that from Louboutin, the Décolletissimos that we've been selling for 4 years, and still they sell. Like, and the Alexander McQueen skull scarf, which was so surprising. For like 6 years, that thing sold like crazy. But these things, like, you just have to balance it out. So you're making sure you're still talking to that customer so she doesn't leave, But then you're also having to make sure that you've got all your navigation and all the other ways that also interact with her, not just your product offer, trying to make it as easy for her to find those things, which is actually becomes the really complicated part, in my opinion. Is like how do you get her to, and that's where personalization, I think, really kind of comes into play, which that's a little more difficult.
So I mean, that's you've that's kind of got it onto, at least for this program, one of our kind of favorite themes, which is the idea that you need to put, there's an instinctive part, and then there's a very rational part that needs to get it all organized. I mean, you're saying really the decisions about what you're going to put out when is instinctive. It's just what happens and what feels right on the day. But then actually the devil is to an extent in the detail of making the route through to that really easy and simple. Yeah. Now, Emeline, you work very creatively, but I would have thought the part of the job that you do, say, for a new startup is to be much more rational than the people that came up with the idea to begin with. Is that what they think they're buying?
No, to a certain extent you are right, and there's a lot of devil's advocate that goes on when they come in, because they don't come in with a brief. We never take briefs. They come in and we workshop everything through with them, and a lot of it will be if they come in and they can't articulate to me in a really concise way immediately what their product is or what they're going to do. There's normally a problem with their business model. Okay, so then they have to go away and like think about that, or we have to fresh some stuff out before we can even put pen to paper or even start like the research piece. You know, you've got to really understand what you're trying to achieve, and the rest can kind of come out of it. But essentially, that's that's the very rational part of it.
I mean, I remember you saying to me earlier that actually you don't take a brief, you just kind of go and live the company. I mean, that's, and that goes so against conventional thinking, which is to say, tie the client down to a brief so you know what you have to deliver against. But you've got a different approach.
Well, because as creatives, you're going to confine us immediately, and also because we need to try and understand and get under the skin of your company, because the company is various different things. It's you as the person, the founder, but it's also the company who is going to be owned by the recipients, essentially, because a brand, when you build something, and Net-a-Porter is probably a really good example of this, it's grown to love. You love that brand, you know what I mean? So you have to understand who you are, the founder, what you're trying to project, what the company is, what you're trying to project, and how that's perceived by everyone else. So that's why we don't take briefs. Also, you'll get a brand new founder, and they just want to brain dump everything down, and it's also passionate, but it's also so chaotic. I mean, they don't know where to start, so it's much better you just talk it through, workshop it, and we'll deliver you back. And more often than not, when we go through the process that I've just told you, what we do is we don't ever start work on branding without kind of delivering them. We'll do all this research, and then we say, well, from our research, we have looked at these sort of colour palettes, or this sort of font, or this sort of tone of voice, so they kind of have an idea of where we're going, and they sign that off, and then we start work.
So you're kind of establishing a trend for them to follow, aren't you? You're kind of
exactly.
saying, I think the trend for your brand is in this direction. Are you going to walk this path with me or not?
Some of it will be personality, and some of it will be from research, and some of it will be things that we think that might happen. Yeah, and some is fact and analysis, and some is dreaming, because we want them to be different, but as they go and as your brand grows, you have to get feedback and be agile and understand that the little things that are working and the things that aren't working, and kind of adapt to that, and who are your new users, who are your biggest users, and sometimes the things that you started with are not the things that you kind of end up doing, and I know that for a fact, so But embracing it for what it is, and not fighting against the tide. I don't either. Although I'm always standing by the fact that you should be agile and learn, I think too much. If you throw too much at people, then they're like, you don't have a clue what you're doing. So it's kind of understanding,
focus.
How to do it, and naturally, I suppose.
If we had, by any slim chance, people in the room who were cooking up their kind of own startup ideas, and I guess there always are some. Everyone's got a startup dream. What kind of advice would you give to them to point them towards success, or indeed to steer them away from failure? Any thoughts, either?
You go first. You're on a roll.
I think to steer them away from failure, do your homework. And do your homework and speak to people and be humble with it. when I went out to Dublin, which is an incredible experience, and if you're going to start, go have a look. It's brilliant. But on day 2, I went around the whole show and I just looked at loads of startups. But you know what? I saw 20 of the same startup, and by the end of the day, I was really disillusioned. I was like, people, have you done your homework? Have you gone out there and have you seen what's already in the industry? Have you seen what's in the market? And it's kind of tricky because you don't quite know, but actually, if you're in startup, you have to kind of be in it, submerged, sorry. And I would ask the people questions, provocative questions, because that's what you have to do. And they kind of didn't know the answers or didn't even begin to think that might be a question. I was like, this is crazy, what are you doing? So yeah, end of day 2, I was really annoyed by that.
I don't think I'd like to see you annoyed. But so, what you're talking about here is the difference between actually following a fashion and actually deliberately avoiding what everyone else is doing. Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is in a startup, it's death to do what everyone else is doing.
Kind of. I mean, you don't want to be so maverick that you're doing something that is never going to work.
It could not have been done before for a reason.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Clearly, I mean, obviously, the repetition means that it's essentially might have been a good thing. I just think it's I can't tell you the magic.
No.
You're not going to fail, but I just think.
And even if you knew it, you wouldn't tell us.
I'd be much more successful now already. No, no, it's just to keep on talking, to keep on getting feedback, to understand that feedback, analyse what's happening.
So it's about being on receive rather than just transmitting, because in order to to carry through a startup, you have to transmit an awful lot. But what you're saying is, you need the absorbing, receiving. Character completely. As well.
I spent an entire year just observing startup, just quietly observing startup. No, quietly. I know that's a shock for you, but very quietly observing startup and who's making the interactions with who's, the little nuances. And now, like, I can walk into a room in that environment and everyone's like, "Oh, Emeline, it's great to see you," and I'm like, "Yeah, this is cool." But it also means that when someone comes to us. Not only will they get our consultancy, I say, well, I can connect you to this person, this person, this person, this person, and that will help them on their way.
Yeah. So particularly nowadays with the digital economy, you're relying on so many different parties to help you through. You're no longer kind of sitting in a brick. I mean, you started even Marcus, right? So you're in a store, and that's where you are, from which you then dispense fashion to the people who care to come in. But it's very, very different now. And sort of all pervasive. And the whole question of the kind of global nature of today's markets is something I definitely wanted to cover. The kind of globalization of brands was clearly a big opportunity for Net-a-Porter. As you said, a brand could appear quite global, but actually, depending on broadband speed, you might actually not be everywhere. Do you think kind of local brands are over? The idea of companies which would just, say, in the fashion space, just operate in one market? Is it inevitably a global marketplace now?
I think it's inevitably. I think it is global. I think that as with everything, there's always a bit of a backlash. So I think you're going to have it go back to everyone's really going to love what's local. That's why the interiors of restaurants are warm. We've had Edison bulbs for years. Kind of that whole homey feeling. Is kind of just to counteract what's going on.
But then you see those in restaurants all around the world. So
you do now, but you've started. It's taken a while to move. But I do think there is some value in local. I mean, particularly in certain markets like India, China, where it's maybe not something that will translate to the rest of the world.
Yeah, and I mean the world waits agog to see how brands will develop in China. Will China develop its own brands? At the moment, they tend to mimic Western brands, but will they move much more deeply into sort of the creative space that we work in over here?
Well, it was an interesting, there's this designer who's done very well in the last few years named J.W. Anderson. He's based here, and he has a very particular aesthetic. It's very clean and it's very cool, and he was being touted around by Anna Wintour and a handful of other people, and he was being told, you really need to cater more to the American market. You need to make it more, because that's always the biggest market for fashion. You need to make it more beautiful, more feminine, and he had the most brilliant response, and it may not have been to her specifically, but he said, I don't want to be big in America, I want to be big in Japan. And I was like, that is so amazing. Because he recognizes what he is and what he wants to do, and it's not just about the almighty dollar.
Yes.
And I thought that was probably one of the best quotes I think I've probably ever heard.
Yeah, very good. Emeline, so global, I mean, are you working with brands that start with global ambitions or just intend to end with them?
No, they all start with global ambitions, and they're all going to float on the stock market, and they've all got their exit strategies already planned out, which is crazy. Because I never started a business to think I was going to leave it. I mean, obviously now that you start thinking about that, but yeah, the majority of them are thinking global and thinking about. Everyone wants to go out to San Fran. That's what they all want to do, don't they? They see the money over there. You know what? Hone your product in the UK market is potentially, it's not harder, but we just kind of know a little bit more about what we think. And I think that you can be blindsided by all the money that's out there. So know what you're doing over here before you're going to take your product over there.
Yes, and you may want to kind of prototype it in one market which you know very well. We were talking about 20-something London earlier, and that's launched by one of our students, must be said. Very, very successful startup.
The London is dropping off that.
Yeah.
So they're
Exactly, yes, 20-something, that's so right. 20-something Paris next.
Yeah, but actually that's what we're saying, isn't it lovely? Because every city they go to can embrace it. It can be in 20-something New York.
But it was essential, wasn't it, for a company like that to really understand, to launch in a market which they truly understood, and to work out which bits, how to meet that market's requirements, and then what would be replicated in a different market, what would be different.
Well, of course, the other thing, I was speaking about this last night, is that, and Holly did start touching on this, is that when you go into another territory, you have to understand the nature of the territory that you're going into, and especially with the brand, is what is acceptable in this instance, and it might be quite playful and funny. Actually, you're going out to a completely different audience, completely different tone of voice, and you never want to lose the essence of that, your brand, but you just have to be mindful about the place that you're going. Is it right? And are you talking right?
Totally. Yeah, and we had to worry about that with product selection, in terms of religious iconography and not wanting to upset people and not even going there. Just if anything felt like it was fringing on something that could actually upset another, because we talked to the world, another culture or race that just didn't even want to go there.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges then of the global marketplace, is that you have to live within that. You have to understand everywhere that your brand is going to tread and make sure you've got appropriate footwear. I mean, that you don't step wrong anywhere that you might go.
The funniest thing is the way that the words work as well, because I was going to do another startup and I had this really cool name for it, and I went to another entrepreneurial organisation called the New Entrepreneurs Foundation, and I said to their founder, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to call it this, and she says, you're not going to call it that. And I was like, why? And she was like, it was just really derogatory in another language, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm not calling it that then. So
there are many
really
cases that
as well, by the way.
car manufacturers frequently come across that particular one, absolutely, and some of them are quite
Like in the US, there was that one a long time ago, the Nova.
Doesn't go. There are worse ones.
But that wasn't so bad. It wasn't really a global market at that point.
But the Rolls-Royce Silver Mist in Germany was not a great idea. So So, Emeline, I want you to tell, because you've never told us about the Naughty Step and what the Naughty Step does, so your dance industry business.
So essentially we do exactly the same thing, just with a different hat on, but the Naughty Step was born out of an undying passion that I have for dance music. We also do some corporate innovation, and we work with an amazing company called Luminar, who have the biggest footprint of nightclubs, or biggest nightclub portfolio in the UK. We rebranded a very well-known nightclub that once was Oceana. We rebranded that to be called Prism. So that was brilliant. But essentially, to illustrate for those guys how to understand the nature of the underground dance music scene, I started writing a little blog for them, and I still write that blog for them, but I also at the same time recognised how much I loved writing that blog and how much of an event it was for my very long-standing passion with the dance music scene. And when we started doing that, we started getting recognition quite quickly, and we now...
Again, it's finding a market, isn't it? It's starting something and then there's a market there, and it's either instinct or it's knowledge, but it's a little bit of both.
But yeah, it was a very long-standing love. So I'm actually kind of winding down to much the horror of everyone. But so we will go and we'll write on festivals and stuff like that, but equally we'll do lovely little pieces of brand work for people, and like I said, we branded this big nightclub, so that's...
And the same disciplines as you would use with...
Exactly the same
with Royal Goat.
Essentially we just apply the same theory.
But in something you really love.
It's all creativity.
Yeah.
That's what the main thing.
Holli, and just last question for you then. Do you think, do you have any sort of, beyond fashion obviously, but any sort of great enthusiasms that might lead you in the direction of what you do in the future? Is there a thing hidden away or not hidden away like dance music that might...
I do like dance music.
Yeah. Do you?
It's a joint venture.
And I was like, we don't talk about that one.
Yeah, good.
You know what, I've spent the last 6 months on basically a sabbatical, kind of mulling all this over, and I've come back to the fact that I love fashion as much as it is like, I've done it for so long, you think, kind of move on, Holly. But
Yet it constantly changes, like music. I mean, it's constantly changing.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I stayed at Net-a-Porter as long as I did also, because it did evolve. I mean, it was almost like a different company every single year, because we had to rethink everything that we were doing.
But also the trends, that idea of I want to work in an area where I don't quite know what's around the next corner, and that's the thrill. I mean, you were talking,
so
Emeline, said about this sort of unquenchable curiosity that you need to have in a creative business.
Yeah, but I kind of look at, interestingly enough now, and I hadn't quite realized it until I started talking to some people, is the technology piece that has been a part of what I've done. I'm not just fashion, it's technology as well, and actually recognizing that and kind of championing that and knowing that that's something that I didn't realize until I started talking to this one person. I was like, got so excited, I was like, oh my God, I guess I do have to do something that's technology and fashion related. And it doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be a store. I want it to be something different, so we shall see.
We shall indeed.
That's
I look
exciting,
forward to it. So at this point, I want to thank you for the conversation so far, but I want to throw it open to the room. So if there are any questions from the audience,